After we previously looked at Carry On Screaming in April of 2022, we are returning on the channel to the Carry On franchise for the second time. As today at the Twitch Points request of Stale, we are going to look at Carry On Dick, released in 1974. Carry On Dick is a satirical parody of Dick Turpin, who was a famous English highwayman in the early 1700s. This was the 26th of the 31 Carry On films and marked an end of the era for the franchise. That's because multiple of the actors had their last appearances in this film. Dick Turpin in this film was portrayed by Sid James, who made his 19th and final Carry On film appearance and actually passed away 2 years later from a heart attack. Hattie Jacques also made her 14th and final Carry On franchise appearance, and she would pass away just 6 years after this film. Barbara Windsor made her 9th and final appearance. She would live until December of 2020 when she would pass away at the age of 83. It was also the 6th and final Carry On film for Margaret Nolan, who passed away just 2 months before Barbara. And the 5th and final appearance of Bill Maynard, who passed away in 2018. And finally, it was the 20th and final Carry On film to be written by Talbot Rothwell, who would then retire and pass away in 1981. Also starring in this film were Kenneth Williams, Bernard Bresslaw, Joan Sims, Peter Buttersworth, Kenneth Connor, Jack Douglas, Marianne Stone, and Patsy Rollins. John Clive and David Lodge also had roles, and sadly, every single person I just mentioned is no longer alive. As far as reception of this film goes, I've looked at a lot, and I mean a lot, of Carry On ranking lists because there's a lot of them, trust me, and almost all of them have this around 20th or 21st or 23rd, making it decently low ranked in the franchise. Which is a shame considering it was a finale for so many of these great actors. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad film, and it certainly doesn't mean it's not worth looking at. And in fact, we're going to look at it right now. Carry On Dick, released in 1974. So our film begins in the year 1750, which is kind of funny because the real Dick Turpin was actually executed in 1739. During this period in time, crime and highway robberies are very much on the up in England. So much so that King George II sets up London's first professional police force named the Bow Street Runners. At command of the Bow Street Runners is Sir Roger Daly. Under him is the androgynous Captain Desmond Fancy, and under him is Sergeant Jock Strap. The Runners initially debut to a great success, cutting down crime immensely. However, there's one highwayman who they can't seem to bring down, Big Dick Turpin and his gang. And if you're wondering, he's called Big Dick because of his massive pistol. Turpin and his gang even succeed in robbing Sir Roger and his wife themselves. Later that night, Turpin and his gang haul up a stagecoach of Madame Desire and her birds of paradise. Madame Desire is a French woman, well, she's not really French, she's pretending to be, and the birds of paradise are her lovely ladies who act as an act to, entice men because they're hot and this is the 1700s. However, Sergeant Jock Strap and the Runners roll up and apprehend Turpin and the gang. Well, at least they think they do, as they're tricked into getting into the stagecoach and it rides off with them in it as Turpin and the gang escape. Sir Roger returns to Captain Fancy without any clothes, having been robbed by Turpin, but Fancy tells him never fear, as Sergeant Jock Strap surely has apprehended Turpin. Sergeant Jock returns to say that he did apprehend Turpin before he'd let him get away. Captain Fancy then declares Dick Turpin public enemy number 1, and he says that he himself, as well as Jock Strap, will go to apprehend him. They deduce that Turpin must be somewhere in the village of Upper Denshire, as that's where most of his holdups are carried out. There they decide to go to a church where they meet a Reverend Flasher. And if Reverend Flasher looks familiar, that's because, shocker, it's actually Dick Turpin in disguise. The other two members of his gang, Tom and also Harriet, who's actually a woman, also work in the church. The two police tell the rector that they are undercover, here to apprehend Dick Turpin, not knowing that they're talking to him. Already with the upper hand, Dick tells them to meet that night at the Old Cock Inn, where he'll give them some information. That night, the Runners go to the Old Cock, where Madame Desire and her girls are also scheduled to perform. They also pretend that Captain Fancy is a highwayman named Dandy Desmond, who is wanted in 6 counties. There they meet an old woman named Maggie, who claims to have known Turpin as she removes some shrapnel from his ass. The only information on him that they get is that Turpin has a birthmark on his willy. Sergeant Strap feels the need to investigate this, and every time someone goes to use the John, he goes and inspects their willy. After the performance of Madame Desire and her girls, the rector arrives to meet with the runners. Still not knowing his true identity, they tell him everything that they know, which is about the birthmark. As Strap continues to look at Dick Turpin quickly hatches a plan. He goes upstairs to meet Lady Desire and tells her that Dick Turpin is actually here, right downstairs. It's actually Captain Fancy. Lady Desire then hatches a plan to get Captain Fancy upstairs to look at his willy. She coaxes him upstairs, but he may or may not be in the closets and doesn't want to engage with her. He runs out of the room with his pants down and falls down the stairs, while simultaneously Jock Strap comes back from the loo, getting beat up by some men whose dicks he looked at. The next day, the runners, who are trying to send off a carrier pigeon, get ambushed by Harriet in her disguise. They tell Harriet that they're highwaymen themselves, and they want Turpin's assistance with a big job they can't do themselves. Harriet gives them some disguises and tells them to meet by an old tree at 10 o'clock at night. Meanwhile, Tom goes to see the local constable and tells him that he knows where Dick Turpin's gonna be at 10 o'clock at night, that exact same tree. All parties converge on that location at 10 at night, with Turpin and friends watching from the trees, and it results in the captain and sergeant both being arrested. The next morning, Dick is awoken by his housekeeper, Miss Hogarth, who tells him that Dick Turpin has been arrested. She does not know of his true identity. Meanwhile, Captain Fancy and Sergeant Strap have been locked up in pillories, where they're having food thrown at them. Back in London, Sir Roger receives the message that Dick Turpin has been apprehended, and goes down to see himself. He takes his wife with him, and they're once again, on the way, robbed by Turpin and the gang. The next day, the rector holds a church sale, selling all the items that they stole from Sir Roger and his wife. At the sale, Miss Hogarth catches on to something suspicious. A couple of the things that the rector told her, like someone being a huge benefactor and another lady being sick, were actually lies. Sir Roger and his wife then arrive in town, once again without clothes. He meets the constable, and since he knows the real Dick Turpin has not been captured, he wants to see who he has captured. He then gets the captain and sergeant free, they all get some new clothes, and they go to the Old Cock Inn. While there, they're being spied on by Tom and Harriet decides to go inside to get a better listen. She turns her back to them, which proves to be a mistake, as the captain recognizes her as the same man who threatened them and told them to go to the location where Turpin was the previous day. Tom tries to warn Harriet that the jig is up, but she can't get out the door quick enough and runs upstairs into Madame Desire's room, where she's apprehended. They then demand to see the birthmark on her penis, and she's like, "Alright, if you insist," and begins to strip. And once they realize that she has breasts, they decide to let her go. But as she's about to leave, Roger's wife realizes that Harriet is wearing the bracelet that was stolen from her the previous day. They deduce that Harriet is part of Turpin's gang and promptly arrest her. Meanwhile, Miss Hoggett confronts the rector over the lies he's been telling, but that's going to have to be immediately dropped and never brought up ever again, as Tom informs the rector that Harriet's been arrested. Sir Roger, meanwhile, sends his wife home under the guise that he has to stay here for work, and in reality, he just wants to sleep with Madame Desire. The rector then goes to the jail where he meets the captain and sergeant once again, and they tell him that they plan to camp out there all night as they think that Dick Turpin will show up and attempt to rescue Harriet. That night at the Old Cock Inn, while watching Madame Desire and her girls, Dick Turpin gets an idea. Dick and Tom raid Madame Desire's room and dress up as girls and head to the police station. They arrive under the guise of keeping the company of the sergeant and captain, and they bite it hook, line, and sinker. They quickly unveil the ruse, however, and steal the guns of the captain and sergeant, and force the captain at gunpoint to send the constable away to get another bottle. The constable goes to the Old Cock Inn to get the bottle, where he meets up with Sir Roger, who scolds him for not being on duty. And the constable says, "Oh, I'm just here to get another bottle, like the first one you sent over with those ladies." And Sir Roger's like, "What ladies? And what bottle? I didn't send anything over." And the constable's like, "Oh shit." By the time they get there, however, Dick Turpin and his gang are gone, and the captain and sergeant are tied up in a jail cell. Next day, Sir Roger demands that Captain Fancy tell him who he told about the plan, and Captain Fancy's like, "No one, except the rector, of course." Sir Roger then realizes that Captain Fancy is wearing one of his old gowns, and he's like, "No, I bought this at the church sale. The rector sold it to me." And as dumb as they are, they finally piece together that the Reverend Flasher and Dick Turpin are one and the same. Meanwhile, at the church, Dick is giving his sermon, but he realizes that the cops are here, and they're surrounding the building. However, because they're men of God, they will not arrest him during the sermon, so Dick decides to prolong it while he looks for a way out. The constable and one of his men are standing right outside the Reverend's room with pistols drawn, so he invites them inside. Thinking that he's going to say a final prayer, they're ambushed and have their guns stolen by Tom and Harriet. As Tom has gone to steal Sir Roger's stagecoach, Sergeant Strap has come around the back to look for the Reverend. Dick and Harriet lure him upstairs, where they get him trapped in a church bell. The rector then comes back out into the church one final time and fakes that there's a fire, which is enough to catch up Sir Roger and Captain Fancy. The three then make a speedy getaway away from the town and across the border to end the film. So I talked earlier about the majority opinion of this film, that it seems to be rated usually as a pretty average carry-on film. However, I enjoyed it. However, this is only my second carry-on film, and I have a feeling that my opinion of this may change as, I watch more of the franchise. I'm not going to do a big board quite yet, but if I was going to, obviously I'd rank this second behind Carry On Screaming. But I still did enjoy it, but as I watch more and more, I could see this maybe staying near last for a while, especially if I watch, some of the better ones first. However, even if it does go down and down the list over time, it won't change the fact that I did enjoy it. And even though I can't properly recommend it as a carry-on film quite yet, I can recommend it as a comedy. Don't get me wrong, it's not sophisticated humor or anything, the whole movie's one big dick joke, but sometimes that's okay. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to do it for my look back at Carry On Dick. We will look more into the Carry On franchise in the future. Thank you, Stale, for requesting this. And next week, we will go from dicks to spiders as we look at arachnophobia. That is it for me today, though. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to leave it a like. If you didn't like it, don't. If you want to follow any of my social media links, they're all in the video description down below, as well as names on my Patrons. Thank you to my Patrons for supporting me and my channels. I appreciate you guys. With all that being said, though, my name is Noah Taft. This has been my Carry On look back at Carry On Dick, released in 1974, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.